So there will probably be two themes throughout these videos. The first theme is kind of repeatedly those 16 points. They'll just come up, as we're talking about things. But the other is I have a list here of only 7 things. So fear not, it's not as long as the 16. But I have a list of 7 things which are dysfunctions that I have seen repeatedly in Agile teams. And these dysfunctions are not attacks, they're actually things that I have just seen happen over and over again. I've upset people in conferences by saying, I'm seeing the trend where people are doing these things, and it's seen as like an attack on Agile, but actually it's more of a red flag saying, hey, whatever we're doing, this has been the impact, and maybe we want to pay attention to it. So we're going to talk about these 7 things, the things that Agile is not. So the first one is isolation. Whether it's product owners or whether it's taking your user story off to your corner to get it done, or whether it's dividing ourselves up functionally by saying, well, I do UX and then I hand that off to the developer and then the developer hands that off to the QA person. All of those are silos. And when we isolate ourselves, either from each other on the team or from the customer or from the other people in our organization, that isolation creates technical debt. Agile, like I said at the beginning, was designed to foster communication. So when we feel like Agile is, or our implementation of Agile is pushing us into a situation where we talk less to people, that isn't necessarily giving us time to focus, but it could likely be giving us time to work alone on something that we don't fully have the context of. So Agile should not be isolation. The second thing, Agile should not be ignorance. Ignorance. This comes from a repeated observation that in the Agile Manifesto, it says that we prefer, working code over, basically unnecessary documentation. The problem with all of that part of the manifesto is that the way that people consume that information is they see those as dichotomies. Even though above it says, this isn't a dichotomy, we're just saying that we should focus on the left side more. People read it as a dichotomy. They read it as the left side good and the right side bad. Okay? So what happens is I've worked with many teams, and by many, I don't mean a few, I mean many, where they've had a big problem with technical debt, problem with legacy code, maybe legacy code that for them feels like legacy, but it's maybe 6 months old. And they don't know what's going on. So I say, well, what documentation do you have around that code? And they'll say none because we're Agile. And that makes me want to, rip my hair out. The Agile Manifesto wasn't saying don't do documentation. It was saying don't do stupid, unnecessary documentation. So we went from like big, upfront planning, detailed design documents. Then we went to like use cases, and then we went to user stories, kind of in an effort to streamline the documentation process and the way that we talk about requirements. The problem is that we've like swung the pendulum so far in the other direction, intentionally or not, and so people aren't doing necessary documentation. That's ignorance, and we don't want that. The next one, probably the most controversial, because this is the one that people will actually teach as a benefit of Agile, but rituals. Agile has nothing in the manifesto about rituals. Rituals are something that somebody made up because you can teach somebody to do a ritual and then you can certify them in it, and then later on you can come back and say that they're not doing it right. This isn't to say that you might not want to have cadences, you might not want to have regular meetings, and those regular meetings might have a format. But you should always be asking yourself, does this meeting meet my needs? Is this meeting solving a problem? Are we having value, positive conversations. Are there results from these things that we're doing? Because I can guarantee you getting together every day and saying, what'd you do yesterday? What are you going to do today? And do you have any blockers? That is a waste of time. There's a million ways that you can already have that information. You don't need to get together and talk about that. You do need to get together every day and talk about what you're going to do tactically to meet the goals of the group and of the company and of the customer. So get rid of the rituals that don't do you any good. The fourth one, stupid experiments. I keep showing up at places where they're like, we're agile and we're lean because we read Lean Startup. And so now we do experiments. And so they just start talking about experiments. But number one, the experiments have no definition. Most of the experiments have no hypothesis. It's just crap that they want to do to see if it works. Doing something because you want to see if it works is not an experiment, it's screwing around. An experiment is actually saying, we're going to do this and we're going to do it in this way, and these are the results we expect. And then you do it, and then you're either right or you're wrong, and then you learn something from that. But if you're just screwing around, that isn't experiments. So you need to actually code to problems that you're trying to solve, and you need to be intentional about how you define those problems. Agile is not mimicry, but boy, it sure feels like it is sometimes. The number of places that I've gone into over the last decade where people are like, well, we're using the Spotify model. It's like, the what? But yeah, we're using the Spotify model. We have guilds and we have squads and we have teams and we have gulags and we have chicken soup, and it's like I don't even know what you're talking about. And then what they would have is they would basically have a group of people and they would be called a squad, and it had no basis for anything. So whether it's Spotify or whether it's Riot or whether it's Jimdo or whether it's any of the companies out there that have had compelling, interesting videos or interviews or presentations at conferences that you've gone to see, don't mimic what they do, right? Listen to what they did. Ask, if they don't tell you, ask them, what problem were you trying to solve? Why did you have guilds? What problem was that trying to solve? And then the question is, what was the result of having them? And if they tell you something like it solved the problem, then that's kind of suspect. When we're working as teams, when we're working as groups, especially when you get to a company of scale, those problems are always mitigated. They're never solved. And keeping them mitigated requires extreme vigilance. And it doesn't require mimicking what somebody else did. It requires you figuring out what problems they were trying to solve, looking at your own stuff, figuring out what problems you want to solve, and then coming up with a system to solve those problems. Again, do it yourself. Don't mimic other people. Sprint planning. We want to do planning, but sprint planning is always a plan. It's a 2-week long big batch plan that everybody sets up. Sometimes it's a month, sometimes it's whatever, but it is a big batch plan. And if you don't meet your sprint goals, you feel bad, okay? Even if you totally buy into, you might not get everything done, we still want to meet those goals. So planning is understanding that as we go forward, things are going to change and we are going to steer the project accordingly. So we want to have a plan, just like I talked about in the last video, but we don't want that plan to say this is what we're going to do. We want the plan to say this is the value that we plan on delivering, and then we work very hard to make sure that we either deliver that or we have a really good story about why it wasn't delivered. Ran out of time is never a good story. Started it, learned some stuff, figured out we needed to build it differently. Awesome story. I promised you a bunch of stuff and I couldn't get it done. Dumb story. Not a good story. Just makes you look like an idiot. Okay, so we want to be able to tell the people that we're delivering value to, as we went through this, we learned these things and it had this impact on our ability to deliver. Okay, the last bit, my personal favorite, because I am one, is false gods. Don't follow false gods. So, in my books or in Kent's books or Alistair's books, we've got tons of things that we've told people to do. And people really do worship the books. I've had people come up to me at conferences and say to me something like, "Hey, on page 138 of Personal Kanban, you said this." And I wanted to be kind of a jerk and kind of poke them with the page thing. So I was like, well, what do we say on 79? And they'll go, "Oh, you said this and this and this." So like, literally, not making this up, literally had the book memorized. And they could do that with the Black Book. They could do it with Alistair's books. They could do it with XP Explained. They could literally quote, literally Bible, chapter and verse, what we had said. That's scary to me. I don't want anybody to take any of the things that I write as a recipe for success. That's a scary thing. What I do want people to do is take the experiences that I've had, the stories that I can tell, the formats that we've seen that have worked in other places, and then say, what would you do with that in your context? That is being agile. Being agile isn't, marching to somebody else's beat. Agile is figuring out what you need to do and the best way to get it done. So the things that Agile are not are isolation, ignorance, rituals, stupid experiments, mimicry, sprint planning, or false gods. That's only 7 things, not so bad. So let's talk about some of these things in detail.